Sri Lanka actually owes about 29 billion US dollars in debt over the next 5 years. And our interest payments alone make up about 2/3 of government revenue. Upcoming payments in the next year total about 6.65 billion US dollars. And we only have reserves now at about 3.13 billion US dollars. And that's, of course, due to a recent currency swap with China. Our reserves, in other words, are dwindling, and our debt to GDP ratio is poor. So we have a debt to GDP ratio of between 100 and 120%.
So what do you make of this restructuring that Sri Lanka is asking from China? Are they actually in a position to go about this any other way other than being basically at the mercy of Beijing?
Well, I think one thing to mention is that this is not new. Sri Lanka has asked for debt referrals before, in 2020, for example. But yeah, there are options for Sri Lanka. They include, of course, leveraging our strategic geopolitical relationships between India and China, but also defaulting and coming up with a kind of a more permanent solution to Sri Lanka's economic problems, most of which I would argue are structural and not a result of one payment or another, but the result of Sri Lanka not being able to have enough income and not being able to have enough government revenue to pay off debts it's been taking for a long period of time. So coming up with a more permanent solution to its debt sustainability problems.
As you say, the economic crisis isn't just due to Chinese debt. What are some of the domestic policies that have contributed to this situation in Sri Lanka, and how is the country planning to tackle its economic woes?
Well, Sri Lanka's problems, of course, aren't just due to Chinese debt. I think actually Chinese debt only accounts for about 10% of Sri Lanka's external debt, and most of our debt is actually owed to markets. The causes of Sri Lanka's debt situation, its current situation and its economic crisis is actually, it's complicated. A lot of this has to do with excessive borrowing in the aftermath of the financial crisis and the loose monetary policy that follows this crisis, but also due to, as I mentioned before, certain structural shortcomings in our economy, a low tax to GDP ratio, for example, barriers to trade, inefficient public expenditure. We spend more on defense now in peacetime than we did during the Civil War. Of course, all of this is exacerbated by the pandemic, lockdowns, border closures, the change in tourist arrivals to our country. And some of this is a result of domestic economic policy, as you put it. Sri Lanka not doing what it needs to do to take accountability and responsibility for this economic crisis and these economic shortcomings, and instead actually doing things to aggravate the situation. So lowering taxes for the wealthy, increasing tax holidays for corporations, introducing ad hoc policies like chemical fertilizer ban, which actually is really debilitating to our agricultural sector, and doing things like imposing blanket import bans, which in my opinion is an unsustainable policy.
And what's the situation like on the ground at the moment? Is the public feeling the crunch as a result of this crisis?
Absolutely. If you look at the way the popularity of the ruling regime kind of has changed in 2019 when the president was elected, and in 2020 when the parliament, the Rajapaksa family and their party came to parliament, they were at the height of their popularity. So they had more, they were more popular than they were when the government had just won a complete military victory. And now, if you look at what's happening on the ground, you see shortages of medicine, gas, milk powder, year-on-year inflation being around 8%. The threat of like power shortages because we can't afford to supply fuel to thermal power plants, and you can really see how the popularity of our elected public representatives has really drastically changed over the last 2 years, and how people are like really suffering, I think, in Sri Lanka.
So it looks like it's going to be another tough year, a tough 2022 ahead. Amita Arudpragasam, thank you very much for speaking with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.